I'll leave you now and hand over to Ilan Pappé.
Right. I think we should differentiate between Israel and Palestine when we ask the question, how does the BDS work from within? Inside the occupied territories, it works on two levels. One is most people are trying not to use or buy Israeli goods, although it's very difficult. For those of you who've been to the West Bank, they would know that there are certain commodities you cannot do without, and so you have to rely on Israeli goods, even if you don't want to. Probably easier in a way in the Gaza Strip than the West Bank. Inside Israel, I think it's much more of a cultural boycott, similar to the one maybe that Palestinian universities in the West Bank are adopting, which is a very difficult task for people who are part of an academia that they ask the world to boycott. But there was a similar situation in South Africa. So I think that what they rely on is the fact that boycott is institutional and not individual. So they can, in a way, talk as academics, for instance, on boycotting institutions, even if they work in those institutions. But I think the main role of boycott from within, if you want, is to give moral support to the whole BDS movement from the outside. There's not much meaning for boycott from within. The boycott is something that comes from without, not from within. But I think the moral legitimization is important. And for the Palestinians in the occupied territories, it's an important message. But their ability to totally exercise the boycott is not easy, given the reality on the ground. It's a good question whether we can call the last wave a new intifada. Usually, as historians, we need more time to decide whether something is a revolution, an uprising, a revolt. If you look at history, you know that it was not easy immediately to identify something. It is definitely has a potential of becoming a new intifada because it is based on frustration, despair. It is not directed from above, it comes from below. It forces the people who are supposed to be the governments or the leaders in Gaza and the West Bank to take note of this, to respond to this. Maybe the world will also respond to this. So it is an intifada in the making, but I would wait before writing on it as the third intifada. Well, I think Hamas is not has its own way of resisting, as we have seen in last summer and in 2012 and in 2009. I think that this is different. This is not Hamas and this is not Fatah. This is the young generation, which is not necessarily affiliated with any political faction. So I think the implication for both the Fatah and the Hamas is the same. They have to take into account an energy that comes from the younger generation, and probably the message is we are not happy with what you are doing so far, whether you are the Hamas in Gaza or the PA in Ramallah. The sense is that they want something more to be done, and they show it by individual acts. There's nothing organized there as yet. It can come later, but it doesn't look very organized at this moment in time. Well, I think that it's now even more complicated because it's confused with the question of the refugees from Syria, and because many of the Palestinians were refugees in Syria, and the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and in Jordan are also now integrated into the big refugee problem. So I think we have to separate between two issues. One is the continuous struggle for the right of return of the Palestinian refugees, which the international community still refuses to recognize, and the settlement of the refugee problem in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, which will probably happen, and will include some Palestinian refugees, because as you know, some of the refugee camps in Syria were destroyed. So we have people who are refugees again. But I think from a Palestinian perspective, the need is to come with a clear strategy of what does it mean to support the right of return in 2015, because it's not the same as the right of return in 1950. Too much has happened since then. And yes, denial of historical memory is always a political act, not only in the case of Israel and Palestine, in every society that either doesn't want to remember embarrassing moments or abusive moments. This is always the problem of people who are victims of human crimes, that the victimizers, those who perpetrated the crime, would like the world or whoever is responsible to forget about these crimes. So erasing the memory is political, struggling for the memory is also a political project. Well, I think Israel is one of, it's not the only, one of the states that violates systematically the international law. I think for most Israelis, international law is something that can only undermine the country's, the state's security, survival and existence. So they see it as a threat. Very rarely do they rely on the international law to justify what they're doing. We usually see the international law as something, if someone brings up the international law, they almost regard it as anti-Semitism, something that is meant to undermine them, which is very sad historically, because international law was mainly solidified after the Second World War because of what happened to the Jews in Europe. But now they don't want to see it implemented in their own case. So I think that this is an exceptional position that Israel has with the help of the West, that it can continue to violate the international law without any fear for any kind of retribution or sanction against it. Yeah, the model which is relevant in the case of war crimes of 1948 is the South African model, not the Nuremberg trials. I don't think it's very useful. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa, where you confront the crimes committed in 1948 because you want to build a different future. So for that, you're not looking to punish people, but you want them to acknowledge what they did, which is a very different system. In Nuremberg, people did not want the Nazis to acknowledge what they did, they wanted to punish them. In South Africa, nobody wanted to punish the people who managed the apartheid system. They wanted them to confess, to acknowledge. And I think we'll need a similar, maybe not exactly the same, but we'll need a similar system in place there. At this moment in time, they will not agree to reconciliation. This is why we all support the BDS, because we think that Israel has to be pressured to agree to reconciliation. So the answer is they wouldn't agree to reconciliation unless the pressure would be so strong that they will have no choice. It will not happen because they voluntarily they will decide suddenly this is the right way forward. It must be a price that they have to pay. And when they would feel that the price is very high, then they will be ready for reconciliation. I think it's not a bad idea to have an international presence in Jerusalem for a short term. I don't know if it has to be the United Nations or an agreed international force, because definitely the Palestinians in East Jerusalem are in need of protection. And the international community so far has failed in providing this protection. So I think this is one possible way of saving them from expulsion, ethnic cleansing, depopulation, transfer, whatever the Israelis have in mind, especially for the eastern part of Jerusalem. So I think, yeah, it's definitely something I wish the international community would have seriously considered, but I doubt very much that they would. I don't think that they will tell the Israelis that they have no sovereignty in Jerusalem, although the international community never recognized the official annexation of East Jerusalem to Israel. That was already done in 1967. But despite the fact that the international community does not recognize the annexation, I don't think they will pass a resolution in the United Nations that forces them to accept international forces or United Nations forces on the ground. No, I think any security company that is working closely with the occupation should be targeted by the BDS. I think it's very clear. There's a lot of international communities, cooperation that deal with security, weapons, digital companies and so on, which either provide assistance or equipment or know-how, advice to the occupation. And I think part of activism today is to expose exactly these kinds of connection and ask the public in the host countries where these companies work to protest very strongly against this kind of cooperation. There's one Swedish journalist who insists that this is what Israel is doing. I looked very deeply into this question, whether the Israelis are using parts of dead Palestinian people who were killed. I couldn't find a proof of this, I must say. At this moment in time, I find it difficult to believe that they would do this, but I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that I really looked very deeply into this question, and I couldn't find any proof. But you know, some of the people who claim this are very serious people, so maybe they have a point. But I think in the short run, there's not much hope. In the short run, probably things will be worse than they are today. But I think in the long run, there are many indications that things will be different. One of them is, of course, the change in public opinion in the West. Dramatic change in public opinion, even in the United States of America. And that's a very positive development. Another one is a recognition of many Palestinians and peace activists in Israel that the two-state solution is not going to work. And there's a beginning of thinking of how to build the one state, which I think is a good idea. But we depend on so many things which are not happening yet. One is Palestinian unity. The issue of Palestinian representation has not been solved. Of course, we are affected by the instability in Syria and Iraq. All these things will impact our possibilities to change the reality on the ground. But there's always hope, and there's a younger generation that is definitely not giving up on Palestine and in Palestine. And I'm sure, as an historian, that Palestine will be liberated one day. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm sure it will be. People will be emancipated, and hopefully Jews and Palestinians will live peacefully together. But it's a very long journey. I mean, people need to be very patient. It's not going to happen soon.
Yeah. We hope for peace.
Yeah?
For Palestine.
Inshallah.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.